Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Phil. So, Phil, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Sure. So thank you for having me, Dan. My name's Phil Rees. I'm working over here in the UK. I run a business called ShipMax, which is a supply chain consultancy business. I've been 18 months now running the company, but 20-year background in mostly the small parcel world. So working with brands and retailers in the UK who are looking to distribute their parcels around the world. So yeah, today I'm on site with one of my customers here. So yeah, I got a few days out on the road this week, just getting around to my customers and some of my suppliers just to have some FaceTime. But yeah, obviously keen. Really pleased to be on with you as well.
Awesome. So in terms of your background, you said that you've been doing this for 20 years. So I'm curious, how did you get into this industry way back when?
There's a bit of a funny story to that, Dan, because when I first started out in the parcel world, I was living in London, but my family and my wife's family were back home in Wales, so like 3.5 hours west. So at the time, neither of us had a car. So I said to my now wife, at the time girlfriend, I said, I was working in a sales job that was local to me in London. And I said to her, I'm going to quit my job and take the first job that offers me a company car, because I'm sick of getting the bus from London back to Wales every weekend or every other weekend. So dusted off my CV, applied for a few jobs, sales roles, business development roles that were offering cars as part of the package. And just so happened that ended up being with a parcel business. And I've remained with the industry for 20 years since. It was a need to get my hands on some car keys that really forced it back in the beginning.
That's awesome. Well, and then I'm curious, right? Because you were saying that you kind of have been focused on and working on small parcels, let's just say, e-commerce, things like that. So obviously 20 years ago, e-commerce was not what it is today. So I guess what did you work on back then? How did that kind of evolve to what you're doing today?
That's a great question. I mean, back when I began in this industry, we were focused on mail rather than parcels, right? So we were interested in direct mail campaigns, magazines, promotional marketing material, this kind of stuff, as well as transactional mailing. And in those days, e-commerce, we called it mail order. So, brands would send out catalogs of their products, physically through the post. People would flick through the catalog, see the products that they like, and then fill in a form, which is usually in the back couple of pages of the catalog, and then use the mail to send that back to a warehouse somewhere where the parcels will be packed and shipped to them, usually with maybe a phone call taking place in between to take payment of a credit card over the phone. So in my early kind of parts of my career, it was really more about the mail than the parcels. But then as in the early 2000s, as the internet began to, spread and disrupt technologies and the industries, what we saw in the postal side of the world was that very quickly the transactional mail, the volumes were just declining year on year really, really quickly. So, advertising that would once be a direct mail campaign became, Google ads and, document courier, where somebody needed a paper copy of a contract on their desk in New York by 9 a.m. the following morning. Things like DocuSign started to erode that sort of type of transaction as well. So the traditional mail and post was kind of doing this in terms of letters and large letters, but there was a new kid on the block called e-commerce, and parcel volumes began to rise. So it was a really interesting, I think, period looking back to be involved in the industry, because I did see it, an enormous change in those early days. And then, as we kind of fast forward through to now, obviously e-commerce has just gone from strength to strength around the world. Volumes have doubled, trebled, quadrupled. Then we have COVID come along, and that, really disrupts and changes people's shopping habits. So it's been an interesting journey for sure, but the industry looks very different today to what I went into 20 years ago, definitely. Because from a international cross-border perspective as well, it's, back then you could clear customs with, the right paperwork, whether it's a CN22 declaration handwritten and stuck on a sticker to a parcel, or a copy of a commercial invoice stuck to a pallet with the documents enclosed wallet. But in the certainly the last decade, all of that side of things is all completely digitized, or it's gone on a digitization journey as well. So now to clear customs, as well as having the right documentation, you've got to have the right data. So, a lot of advice and guidance that I'm working with clients around is about, optimizing those data flows, making sure they got the right systems in place and all of those kind of things. Because, the world's changed very rapidly and continues to change very rapidly. I mean, obviously we've got things like AI and all of these kind of new technologies now coming into people's work lives as well. So yeah, I think in order to succeed in this sector, you do have to, you have to think about it physically, but you have to think about it digitally as well.
For sure. And I guess like, what does that kind of look like, right? So if you can kind of just, dive in, in terms of giving an example or a case study of how you work with your clients today. I mean, obviously people are shipping products, even if they're in the UK, all across the world. So what does that process look like, and kind of how do you help your clients optimize that process?
Yeah, so it's a real broad spectrum. I mean, I'm working in some cases with pre-revenue startup level businesses who are just, looking for some help about how they shape their proposition and which bits they keep in-house, which bits they outsource, that kind of thing, all the way through to working with, established brands who might be doing, 80, 100 million pounds or dollars in revenue annually. So it's very broad and diverse, which is one of the things that I love about it. More recently as well, I've been involved with a Welsh government program. It's called the Business Wales Accelerated Growth Program. And what it ultimately is a pot of funding available to businesses in Wales who are looking to expand and hire people from the local economy, and also who have some sort of export proposition to what they do. So that's a really really interesting thing, and part of the ShipMax journey that I had no plan for. It was something that kind of came out of left field a little bit, really. But to sum it all up, what generally happens, to your question, is a brand or a business will come to me with a challenge. That might be that they feel like they need to reduce cost in a certain area, or it might be that they no longer want to work with one of their partners. They want to find a new partner for the next phase, or it might be that they want to expand into an international market, but they've never traded in that market before. So they want to make sure their business is fully optimized, the flow of goods and the customs processes. But I always say it's a bit like the peeling away the layers of an onion, because what happens is, they'll come to you with whatever challenge it is that they're facing, that's, the noisy thing from the current time. But as trust develops and you get to talk to them and understand a bit more holistically about their whole business, then you might end up talking about one thing but end up then working on 3 or 4 things, because you kind of identified that there are other areas where they could either be doing better, doing more, or reducing cost. But yeah, so it's very broad and varied. Sorry to give you a long-winded answer to a straightforward question. But yeah, lots of different clients with lots of different challenges. I mean, I'm fortunate that because I've been around a long time and I've got quite a good network, generally speaking, my job is to introduce the shipper to a solution provider that can help them in its simplest form, so they'll come to me with a problem about their returns. I introduce them to a returns provider that they might not be familiar with, or, they might come to me because they're paying too much for their containers of their stock coming in from wherever their factories are. So we look at the market for containers and make, recommendations for new partners they can work with. So generally speaking, through all the supply chain elements of an e-commerce business, so, goods from factory to warehouse, from warehouse to consumer, or B2B transactions out the door, and then all the way looping back to, into returns processes as well. So I try to, have solutions all the way through the value chain.
For sure. And I guess like obviously as you said, right, that it varies across the board, but I'm just curious, right, if you can share some examples or unlocks that you found for clients, because yeah, I mean, I'm sure that many of these companies come to you, then you kind of help them save money and optimize their processes where in the past that they were doing things in a certain way, which is hurting their bottom line, things like that. So yeah, I'm just curious about if you can maybe share, just dive deeper into a case study.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a recent one that's fresh in the memory. So one business, fairly local to me, they've grown really, really quickly. They have a really innovative way of recycling waste plastic into like sort of finished material that you can use, to work surfaces down in your kitchen or to create furniture from, or it might be to fit out a store or retail unit. And they were working with a particular carrier. They'd grown very, very quickly, had a small team, wanted some support around, that particular carrier or other options around that carrier. And by going very carefully through their invoices, there was one surcharge in their invoice that stood out like a sore thumb. And, we went after a saving against that surcharge, and we're able to generate them. I think it's something like it's forecast to be 35 to 40,000 pounds per annum by getting a successful reduction to that one surcharge. So that was fairly recent. But yes, I mean, another project recently, a much larger brand had a data issue. That data issue had led to them over declaring the value of their goods across borders, and they couldn't really get to where the incorrect data had found its way into their code. So I have some very good developers that I work with. We were able to go back through, months and months, if not years worth of emails, look at everything that was shared because there was various parties involved. You had the brand themselves, you had their warehouse management partner, you had their carrier management partner, and we basically did a big investigation for them to find the source of the problem that had led to them paying more duty, quite considerably more duty than they should have. So that was an interesting one, not the usual kind of project, but a really interesting project, which involved going through lots and lots of communication, lots and lots of lines of code to establish ultimately where the mistake had crept in, and so that the right people could be held to account for that mistake. So yeah, it's an eclectic mix, I suppose. There's lots of different case studies that I could give. Always trying to just add value, always trying to make sure that whatever somebody invests in terms of working with ShipMax, they get back way more in return, whether it's bottom line savings or new sales opportunities into new markets. Always about trying to add value that's way beyond the investment of working with us.
That's awesome. In terms of your business, Rick, because obviously now we're just sort of Q2 of 2025. So what are some of your biggest goals and objectives for the rest of this year?
That's a really interesting question because I'm at quite an inflection point for the business, I suppose you'd say. So, up until this point, it's myself working with, other subcontractors and freelancers. So I do have a kind of virtual team, if that makes sense. But really, I'm doing everything within the business. I'm kind of looking after and managing myself. But definitely getting to a point now, 18 months in, where I need to, look at how I can move on to the next level and grow the company. So I've just moved from a hot desking arrangement to taking a permanent office, which is quite local to where I live in Swansea. It's actually part of one of our local universities. And my plan for the rest of this year is to begin to grow a team, but very much leveraging the university because they're very collaborative uni, and they provide part-time resources for people who are still completing their studies but want to earn a bit of extra cash, or if they have completed their studies, then they can join on an intern scheme. As of May, about 3-4 weeks from now, I get the keys to my first ever office, and then I'll be rattling around in them on my own for a little bit. But the plan is to just carefully and slowly start building some colleagues around me, because otherwise what I do has a glass ceiling, really, because I've only got so many hours in a working week that I can dedicate to these things myself. And I
Exactly.
think because when you're new on your journey, as I still kind of consider myself to be, you end up maybe kind of going after lots and lots of different things. And that's definitely been the case with me. Whereas I think, one of the other goals for this year and into next year is to kind of niche down and look and analyze at what's gone well for ShipMax at this point, and then just double down in those areas. Because at the beginning, I was in a phase, like I guess a lot of new consultants and a lot of new business owners are just I was predisposed to saying yes to almost anything, right? Because
Right.
it's just like, that's the strategy, right? Just get involved in as many different things as possible, and then lean into the ones that are working and lean out of the ones that maybe aren't working or are going to take a longer time to bear fruit. So I've been through that phase, and I think now it's about being laser focused on the bits that I know and I'm confident we can deliver well time after time for the clients, and then building some systems around that as well, so that not always kind of starting from a lot of what I get asked to help with, it's often repeating similar processes, but for new clients. So, just about building some structure around all of that, really. So yeah, it's an interesting time. I'm just about, it kind of feels like a bit of a cliff edge moment, I suppose, in a way, to
Right.
be taking a permanent residence and starting to think about hiring people. But yeah, it's exciting as well.
100%. So obviously that you've been doing this now for 18 months. So if you could go back in time to before you started this business, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
That's a great question. I think I wouldn't change very much, because I think everything we do in business and in life we learn from. So, I'm not a marketeer, right? Out of all the hats I wear at ShipMax, and I wear the finance hat, and I wear the sales hat, and I wear the project manager hat, most of those hats I'm fairly comfortable wearing. The one that I find least comfortable is marketing, because I don't really have a strong background in marketing. So if I was going to give myself advice, I would say, don't chase too many shiny marketing things, because they're often expensive, and the results you get are often, not always, a little bit on the disappointing side. So yeah, I mean, I've definitely sort of made some mistakes in that area, let's say. So yeah, that's probably the thing I would say. I would say, don't believe everything you see and read when it comes to marketing.
Makes sense. Yeah, and that's good advice. If somebody watching this wanted to work with you, do you mind sharing your website and social media, I guess, best ways to get in contact?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is www.shipmax, that's shipmax.co.uk. My LinkedIn, I'm just Phil Rees on LinkedIn, or you'll find ShipMax on LinkedIn as well. That's our main kind of channels at this point. I don't tend to use other social media stuff, because all my selling is B2B. So
Right.
all of my marketing really starts and ends on LinkedIn. I'm not really on any of the other things like Instagram or Twitter, whether I end up going down that route over time, potentially. But yeah, look me up on LinkedIn, send me a connection request. I always accept them. And yeah, by all means, have a look on ShipMax. Within the contact us section of the website, there's a very short form. Once you submit that form, it'll take you through to my Calendly. You can book a half an hour call with me through that method. Or I'm a crazy WhatsApp guy. WhatsApp's my favorite form of communication. So I have click to chat on WhatsApp on the website as well, that comes straight through to my phone. So if anybody did want to just, grab my attention, then that's a good way to do it as well.
Awesome. Well, Phil, thanks so much for your time today.
Pleasure, Dan. Good to talk to you.